Hi guys, it's Norman Sutherland from Higher Ground Lifestyle. Firstly, apologies, it's been a wee while since we've done a video. But now we're going to get on with the next job on the Jimny, and that is all about adding capacity. What are we going to do that? Well, today we're going to be fitting a tow bar. Before we do that, I think the sensible thing to do is to get the Jimny out, give it a good clean, because we're going to be working underneath the car and it's been doing some pretty muddy running over the last few weeks, so let's get on with the job. Okay, so I've given the car a good clean, good pressure wash underneath. What better way to dry it off on a lovely day than to take a run to the local Suzuki garage to pick up the tow bar. Okay, so I've arrived at my local Suzuki dealer, West End Suzuki in Dundee. Pick up the tow bar. Here's the man who's going to sell me a tow bar. There are two kits that we need to fit the tow bar. The first one is the electric kit, and I have decided to get all of my equipment direct from Suzuki UK, and you can see the relevant part numbers there. So that's the dedicated electrics kit, and also the tow bar itself, which comes in a fairly sizable box. And again, you can see the relevant part numbers there. In the box we've got the tow bar itself. We've got a white canvas bag that contains the removable swan neck and a Suzuki branded cover for the tow ball. And we've got a bag of accessories that has got spacers, bolts, various other bits and pieces in it. Seems pretty straightforward. Also, the instructions look as if they're in there. The next box is the dedicated electrics. There's the part number. Let's have a look at what's in this one. Okay, so we've got a bag with the loom in it. We've got a separate electronic gizmo box. Can't do anything in cars these days without an electronic gizmo box, and a set of instructions for the electrics. Now, when we were looking at fitting a tow bar, we did look at a number of alternatives to the Suzuki produced tow bar. The reality is that we stuck to Suzuki for a few reasons. One, the price is actually very reasonable compared to the non-Suzuki alternatives. A Witter tow bar for the Jimny is being advertised just now at £500 fitted. The Toyota one in the UK came in at 470. Okay, we're going to have to fit that ourselves, but I think we can manage that. The second reason for doing that was the issue of fitting and the fact that the car is relatively new. We didn't want to fit a non-Suzuki part to a car that's still, you know, less than 6 months old. The other issue was that having recently fitted a non-standard part to another car, it was a Honda, we had such a problem with the electrics, having to cut it in and track wires back, that we thought, no, let's get the OEM wiring harness, which should make life a lot easier. Fingers crossed it does. We've put the Jimny up on ramps now just to make access a little bit easier, and it's still drying off, giving it a good wash underneath. Just standard car ramps, and that gives us good access underneath the car. Also, anytime you're working with ramps or you're working under a car, don't forget the safety, guys. So we've got the handbrake on, we've also left the car in gear, and I'm going to chock the wheels as well before I get underneath it. There are 3 different sets of instructions provided. One for the tow bar fitting, one for the swan neck, and one for the electrics. First one we want to look at is the one for the tow bar. There's the usual everything in triplicate in every language under the sun, and the actual instructions really only amount to 2 or 3 pages. And the first thing we've got to do is remove the bumper, and helpfully all it says is refer to the manual. I've already looked in the Suzuki owner's manual. There is nothing at all in the owner's manual about removing the bumper. It's obviously just in the service manual. I don't have a service manual, so the first thing we're going to have to do is to work out how the bumper comes off. Thereafter, everything else looks pretty straightforward. It's all just done by instructions, and it gives us the various different torques that are required, and then helpfully put the bumper back on. And I think really the most challenging bit of this job is likely to be working out how we remove the bumper. The electrical instructions are quite a bit more complicated insofar as the electrics have to go right from the back of the car right to the front of the car. That's a bit annoying. I was hoping that everything would connect in the rear, but it looks like there are quite a few panels that are going to have to come out, both the front panel and the side panels, and basically all of the rear panels are going to have to come out as well. Now that's not a problem, we have done that before, we did it to fit the rear speakers and things, so If you want to see how that's done, have a look at some of my other videos and you'll see how all the rear panels come out. Right, so the first thing we want to do is to strip out the interior of the car, get all the stuff out of the boot, fold the seats forward and start removing some panels and the bumper. Now the only one of these trim panels that needs to be removed that we haven't showed you how to remove before is this one that's in the passenger footwell. It's very straightforward. There is a screw in the front there, right in the passenger footwell. That gets unscrewed and comes out, and then the whole panel gets pulled towards the rear of the car and it's held on at the top edge by another clip. So very straightforward to remove. Right, so that's us stripped out all of the interior panels. Took about 5 minutes. Taking the rear panel off, taking all the interior off from the boot, also taking off that side panel and the panel at the front. And we can see there we have access to all of the electrics running from the front to the rear of the vehicle. Don't forget, when you're removing the left hand side, if you're fitted with it, if you have a UKS Z5 model, there will be a 12 volt socket in there. Don't forget to disconnect that as well. Next thing we now need to do is to figure out how to remove the rear bumper. We haven't done that before. There are some obvious bolts holding the bumper along the top edge. Combination of bolts and clip connectors. And when we come underneath, there are also an obvious additional 2 bolts just outside that ring that hangs down on each side. Let's see how we get on by removing these first. Okay, so those bolts come off easy enough. And I wasn't sure, but it's a captive nut on the back of them, which makes life a bit easier. Okay, second one. They're really just a little more than finger tight. Okay, so we've managed to remove the bumper and it's a 2-man job. Ian is holding on to the bumper there. We released the bumper with bolts that go across the top, of which there are 5, plastic clips, of which there are 2, one in the middle and one right over at the other side, and also underneath 4 bolts, one of which comes from the bottom up and one of which comes kind of back in the arch. So that's how you release the bumper, pretty straightforward. What we now need to do before we drop it down is just to disconnect the electrics at the back. Okay, we've now gently pulled the tow bar away. We haven't disconnected the electrics yet, although we have opened up that cover just to give us a bit more space on the electrics. It just flips up and it's just sitting on a couple of stools just now so that we can start to work under the car and position the bumper. This is fun. We're under the car and we've cleaned up the mounting holes which are under the chassis on both sides. The left hand side of the car is easy enough to locate on the pins on the bottom and on the side. On the right hand side we just have to be careful, and that has to hook over the top of the exhaust pipe to find its locating holes. It just tucks in, and that is the position that we're going to be mounting. In. Okay, let's get the bolts and things ready. Okay, we're now ready to actually position the tow bar in place. It's quite an awkward job, so I'm going to be underneath and Ian's going to be holding on to the captive bolts. So the drawing here explains what we're trying to do quite easily. We've already shown you we've got to clip this right hand side over the top of the exhaust, and that's the awkward bit. And then while we're holding it up, we're going to get these 2 bolts into the captive nuts. If we look at that on the actual car, so the captive nuts are on the end of a bit of wire, and that's simply so they can be located in that tube. Now what we've done is we've cleaned out that square box section before we do the bolts. The other thing the instruction says is don't use any oil or grease on any of the bolts, use brake cleaner. So before we put the bolts and the nuts in, we're going to just use a wee bit of bolt cleaner just to make sure that it doesn't stick too hard. Okay, back under the car. What we've done is we've temporarily put in one of the bolts that comes in from the side, on both sides, just to take the weight off the bar, to allow us to locate the bolts that come from the bottom up. And you can see how you've got to just carefully locate those captive bolts using the rod on the end of the bar. All the bolts are now in place with the spacers. If we have a look at this from the back, there's an extra spacer on the right hand side here between the tow bar and the bracket. To maintain the patency of the tube, there is a spacer in between, and then there's a nut on the outside. They're the same on both sides, the only difference is there's not a spacer on the other side. And you can also see there how the captive nuts are held in place and what that little bit of metal on the end is for, just so you can hold it to locate the pins. Next thing we've got to do is we've got to torque that up to 110 Newton meters on all three of the bolts on either side. That's it.